Well, it's definitely been a while since I've made a retrospective video. I was going to do one on the Kingdom Hearts games, but that's still in the works. So instead, I'll be making another Crash Bandicoot retrospective. I already made one covering a majority of the games. The ones that I mostly left out was Crash Boom Bang, because I wanted to save that for Forgotten Media, and Crash Mind Over Mutants, because that was the only game that I didn't have and played yet. Well, recently I have managed to get my hands on that game. I tried looking for the PS2 version, and oh boy, I did not expect it to be so freaking expensive these days. I didn't bother getting the 360 version simply because I'm not an Xbox guy, and I remembered to stay away from the DS version because I've heard that's the worst one. So now I have the Wii version of Mind Over Mutants. I haven't played it yet, so I have no idea if there's any differences between the other versions, but hey, at least now I can say that I own every single Crash Bandicoot game, minus the old mobile phone racing games that have become lost to time. So this new retrospective will just be focused on the new games that we've gotten, starting with Crash Bandicoot N. Sane Trilogy. Now you might be surprised that when it was first announced, I wasn't interested in it, and you might be asking, why wasn't I excited on the idea of bringing back my childhood gaming icon? Well, let me take you back to the early 2010s for a moment. While Mind Over Mutants was the last Crash game made for consoles back in 2008, Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 2 was technically the last Crash game made in general, which was in 2010. And after that, there were no new announcements that surfaced for years. No more game announcements, no more merchandising, there was nothing for almost a decade. I remember hearing rumors about Crash's possible return and getting all excited about it, only to be left disappointed and pissed off when they were revealed that they were just games that were cancelled years ago, or just random fake rumors. And believe me, the 2010s were full of fake rumors about Crash Bandicoot's return. That's why I always said back then how the series wouldn't be coming back because of the Activision curse, ooh. Especially when PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale came out, and Crash Bandicoot is not represented anywhere in that game. Such a missed opportunity there. I've heard rumors that both Crash and Spyro were considered to be playable fighters for that game, but Activision was demanding a lot of money for it, so who knows if that was true or not. And then there was the PlayStation Experience event from 2015, where Sean Lawton came out on stage wearing a Crash Bandicoot t-shirt. Nowadays, it's no big deal, it was just a shirt that was secretly foreshadowing future events. But back in 2015, when the franchise was still considered dead, we didn't know that. All we saw was just some guy walking up with that shirt expecting something to happen, and nothing new gets announced for Crash. So back then, it just felt like Sony was just trolling the fan base in 2015. And 2016 wasn't that different either. I mean, sure, it was kind of neat seeing Naughty Dog recreate one of the levels from Crash 1 as a playable Easter egg in Uncharted 4, but all it did was just remind me of a dead series that would never return. And the banter between Drake and Alina during gameplay just came off as being very mean-spirited. But then again, I've never played any of the Uncharted games, despite the fact that I own the Uncharted Trilogy collection thanks to the whole PlayStation Now gimmick, and I'm sure that wasn't Naughty Dog's intent in mocking one of their past franchises in a negative light, so I'm sure I was just being too harsh on that cameo. And then E3 2016 came, where they mainly focused on announcing that Crash and Cortex would be playable in Skylanders Imaginators, and, well, let's just say I wasn't a happy camper about that. After calming down, I did eventually find that quick announcement video about remastering the classic Crash trilogy. After all the crap I had to deal with, I didn't take that announcement seriously. I just wrote it off as just Sean Lawton trolling the fanbase again. Yeah, I was very bitter and cynical at that point in time. But then came that fateful day on December 3rd, 2016, where we actually got a reveal trailer for Crash Bandicoot N. Sane Trilogy. And my god, the graphics, the music, nostalgia, the models, the animation, just fucking everything was beautiful. It's funny how it was a complete 180 experience for me. I started off pretty cynical when I first hit the play button on that video, and by the end of it, I was this close to breaking down in tears of joy. I didn't care that it was just the same old games, just given a new coat of paint in this new game engine. I was just excited to see Crash finally come back, after being abandoned for so many years. Like, yes, finally, my boy Crash Bandicoot is back for real! I was even excited when a later trailer showed that they brought back the Crash Bandicoot suit that they used from those old commercials. Fun little nostalgia trip there. Of course, I still had some doubts, with the voice acting and, of course, who was actually making the game, but when I heard that Vicarious Visions was going to be working on it, then I had more faith in the project, mostly because Vicarious Visions is known for working on Crash Nitro Kart and all the Game Boy Advance titles. I'm sure it wasn't the original staff that was doing this, but hey, the name alone just made me more optimistic about it. So, once pre-orders were available, I did just that and got a call that I could attend the one-day early event at GameStop that was hosting it. Had to stay in line for a bit. I got the game with the fancy pre-order Aku Aku keychain. I drove home, I popped that game in, and I just fucking loved it. Most of my views for the original mostly apply here. Crash 3 is still my favorite, Crash 2 is still good, but there's definitely a big difference when playing Crash 1 and the Insane Trilogy version. Well, for one thing, in the Insane Trilogy version, there's actually analog support, so it just feels great finally playing that game with that analog option, rather than being stuck with that D-pad controls like in the original. And you can actually save manually like in Crash 2 and 3, as well as auto-saving. And I can tell you, after dealing that for years in the original, especially dealing with, only saving with a ton of bonus stages or collecting the gems, I went full autosave when I first played Crash 1 on the Insane Trilogy. And the difficulty was fixed here, where in the original you had to break all the crates in one go without dying, checkpoints didn't count. Well, now you can die as many times as you want, and it still keep tracks of how many crates you've broken, so that it's much easier to get the gems. Although the colored gems, you still have to break them all in one go, so yeah, the original challenge is still there, but at least it's a little more balanced this time. And as an added bonus, the crates from the Tana, Embryo, and Cortex bonus stages also count to the total amount of crates, since back then they didn't count. And they're structured more like 2 and 3, where if you die in the bonus stage, you can try again without the cost of a life, which is something you couldn't do in the original. Die once and you have to restart the level to try the bonus stage again. Hoi. Another nice difference is the whole Papu Papu stage. I mean, sure, it's still pretty easy, but it's pretty obvious that they took a page right out of the Japanese version of Crash 1, where he has more health, and his attack becomes a lot more faster. And then there's the loading screens that Aku Aku shows up, occasionally giving out tips. Some say it's unneeded, but personally I think it's another nod to the Japanese version, where how you might get hints from Aku Aku when you break one of his crates. Getting through the bridge levels felt more difficult for some reason. At first I thought it was just because I hadn't played the original game for so long, but I quickly learned that a lot of people were having the same issues with this level. And speaking of levels, it was also surprising that later on they decided to add in Stormy Ascent, a level that was cut from the original game for being too difficult, and it definitely shows. Still, it's great seeing cut content coming back in some form or another. Originally, it started off as DLC for the PS2 version when it was exclusive to that, but later on when the game was available in different consoles, I think they updated the PS4 versions where they have that level and a bonus level already in the game and not doing the whole DLC thing. Either way, Crash 1 on the Insane Trilogy was great. If you've never played the first Crash game before, I highly recommend playing the Insane Trilogy version. It fixes a lot of the issues that the original had. I don't have much to say about Crash 2 in this version. It's mostly everything that feels the same. Like, yeah, Cold Hard Crash is still a pain to get through, but I suppose they were kind enough to adjust the camera to show that hidden crate in that bonus stage. And the addition of having the option to go through the levels with time relics in 2 and 1 was a nice addition. With Crash 2, you can unlock the speed shoes when you defeat the final boss, and the runs are pretty good for time trials. As for getting the time relics in Crash 1, oh boy, those levels are not made for time trials, and there's no speed shoes or anything to help out. Also, it was nice that you have the option to play as Coco in this trilogy. It's purely cosmetic, but it's still nice. And finally, there's Crash 3, my very first video game and one of my favorite Crash games, and it still is in the Insane Trilogy version. I was really excited that I finally got around to this part of the collection, and re-experiencing all the levels and bosses. It was great. Although for some reason Coco's jet ski is a lot looser in this version than how it was in the original. I don't know why they did that. And just like Crash 1, it also gets an additional level, this time a brand new level that really puts you to the test with mastering the abilities you've earned. That's another interesting thing about this version. When it comes to using the fruit bazooka in the original game, I barely used it, but now I started having more fun using it and finding new ways to make better use out of it. And that covers all the games in the collection. I guess I could ramble on a little bit about the designs and the voice acting. It's really good. Love seeing the classic designs getting updated with the new game engine and all that. I would expected they would have to tone down Tana's design, but it still looks nice. And it was a nice touch where in the cutscene she knocks out one of the lab assistants before being surrounded by them. A nice way of updating the character who can defend herself rather than being a damsel in distress like in the original. Yeah, that's another thing I loved about this compilation is the animation. The characters just move about so gracefully with personality each step in their body language. It was great. And then of course there was the voice acting. I was a little bit skeptical when I heard they were just going to use the more recent voices of the characters, but the worries quickly went away when I got to hear them. Of course, Lex Lang is always great as Dr. Cortex, no disrespect to Corey Burton. Maurice LaMarr was an improvement. I did like how he sounded in Mind Over Mutants from the cutscenes I've seen, but I found his personality to be too whiny, where here he's having more fun being an embryo, sounding, crazy and how he was like in the original. Loved hearing Uka Uka sounding more menacing, which really surprised me that John DiMaggio's still voicing him. Like, compared to how he voiced him in Titans and Mutants, compared to the Insane Trilogy, it's freaking night and day. And he comes back to voice Tiny again, since he hasn't voiced the character since Nitro Card, but he still does a good job of doing it. And the same dude with Corey Burton reprising Engine and Entropy. I do like the guy in many, many roles that he's done in other media, but when he voiced those characters back in Wrath of Cortex, let's just say the bits of dialogue he did were pretty awkward. So now he's given a second chance to do the characters, and it was definitely a big improvement. And the same goes with Greg Eagles as Aku Aku. Sure, Mel Winkler will always be the best Aku Aku voice in my opinion, but I do like how Greg's voice, for him voicing the character in the remastered games and in Crash 4, is definitely a big improvement from how he started off in Titans and Mutants. But anyway, I think I've rambled on enough about this compilation long enough, so yeah, I definitely love the Insane Trilogy. It made me feel like a kid again. Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled. I freaking love this game. Remastering the classic Crash Team Racing and going above and beyond with its game's content. Remastered all the classic tracks, the Nitro Kart tracks, and provide some brand new tracks. Fully customizable karts, online multiplayer, and featuring a whole bunch of playable characters for the franchise. From the classic characters to the post-Naughty Dog era characters, and even some of the more obscure ones like Yaya Panda and Rillaroom. I was geeking out when I heard that you can select Oxide's car to drive around in. That's something I always wanted to do in the original CTR. And the addition of karts from Nitro Kart and even Tag Team Racing was also pretty cool. And the addition of the original karts was also pretty cool, seeing those brand new ones. And those Grand Prix events was always something that I looked forward to in this game. Nitro Tour reintroduced the Nitro Squad as playable characters, now with personalities and voices. And if you follow me on DeviantArt, I'm sure you already know which one is my favorite. Back in Time was okay, one of the more weaker Grand Prix events in my opinion, and it's not because of the whole macrotransaction thing that was added. I had no problem farming for Wampa coins as normal, and honestly I keep forgetting that this game has microtransactions, but it's because it's kind of hidden in this game. Probably because everything in the pit stop in this game is also purely cosmetics. That's another thing why I didn't have such a beef about it, unlike most people. The Spyro and Friends Grand Prix was also pretty good. I seen two of my childhood gaming icons together again. The Spooky Grand Prix was a much needed update from adding in fan requested characters to adding in engine swapping. Back then when it first came out, certain characters had specific stats, but now you can customize the driving styles to whatever you want to drive around in. The Neon Circus Grand Prix was also good. Nice to see the Crash Tag Team Racing characters return, and the new Ring Rally mode is really fun. Winter Festival Grand Prix is definitely one of my favorites, mostly because they highlight some of the more obscure characters in the franchise, including a character dedicated to a popular myth in the original CTR. Wrestling Grand Prix was nice, the post-apocalyptic style, and the surprising return of Megamix, another obscure Crash character. And then there was the Gasmoxia Grand Prix, being the last event in the game, giving us the highly requested Emperor Velo, his cart, and a very challenging new racetrack. And finally, the post-Grand Prix update, or the Beanox update as I call it. It was a nice little encore for being the last major update to the game. I've already gushed over this game a lot in previous videos, and it's still great. A well-made game celebrating the franchise's history, something that a certain blue hedgehog should have taken notes from. Crash Bandicoot 4, it's about time! After dealing with the amazing remastered games, I was all for the idea of Crash getting a brand new title, and this one delivers. It's kind of funny how we now have two games that are called Crash 4, because in Japan, Wrath of Cortex was called Crash 4. I bet that must have been very confusing for people over there. But hey, the Japanese commercial for it was a lot of fun. They even brought back the Japanese Crash Bandicoot song. Although it is weird that, despite the fact that this was a Japanese Crash Bandicoot mascot already existing, the suit they used for that commercial was the standard one, except they had the face area covered up so that it looks like Crash has a full row of teeth. I guess the Japanese outfit was lost or destroyed or something happened to it. Anyway, this new Crash 4 game is also good. Plays like a standard classic Crash game, but adds more to it, like the mass power-ups, whether it be slowing down time or shifting objects in between realities. The difficulty is more challenging, and the additional playable characters was also great. Crash and Coco play as you'd expect. Cortex is more on the platforming, especially with his ray gun turning enemies into platforms. Tana, or Alt Tana as I call her since she's from another dimension, was also nice, using her grappling hook to move around and stuff. And Dingodile is more of the heavy type with his leaf blower thing. Very interesting direction they took with this character. Apparently he doesn't feel like continuing on with life as a villain, so he just wants to run a diner. Sure, it doesn't look great and the food is terrible, but he has a real passion for running the place, and I just find that really amusing. The story is also great, taking place right after Crash 3 left off, where Entropy and Cortex are trapped in purgatory. Now Entropy becomes more of the main villain for the most part, and teaming up with a female version of himself who was responsible for killing Crash and Coco from Alt Tana's dimension. There was also the addition of the inverted stages that are basically the mirror mode of the levels, with wacky filters thrown into it. Some of them are good and some not so much. But some of them do change up the gameplay a bit, like there's some levels where it's pitch darkness and the only way to see anything is by doing a spin attack, which creates this big sonar radar that lets you see the rest of the level for a while. I also like to say that I really like these new designs for the characters. It's a nice way of making them more modern, but still familiar and not too drastically different. I feel like this is a much better approach than what Titans and Mutants tried to do with their redesigns. If there's one thing that this game goes overboard on, are the collectibles. You have the standard gem and time relics, as well as unlocking costumes, which are great, but then you have the reverse gems for the inverted stages, and of course it doesn't help that a lot of the levels have a lot of hidden crates. Yeah, Crash 4 loves to put hidden crates in their levels, which can be very annoying. And then there's the insanely perfect relics, where you have to break all the crates in one go without dying. Yep, another throwback to the original Crash one. And then there's the flashback tapes that are hidden in levels, and the only way to get them is by reaching them without dying once. But once you've reached the tape and collected it, then you're good to go. You don't have to restart the level if you died after getting the tape. The flashback tapes are pretty cool, being difficult 2D sections taking place during the events of Crash 1, a very cool way to expand the lore of the Crash franchise. So yeah, Crash 4, it's good, but I think they went a little overboard with collectibles when going for the 100% and 106% ending. I find this game to be very similar to Super Mario Sunshine and Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Good games when you just casually play through them, but they're quite the marathon when going for the 100% route. And finally, we have Crash on the Run for mobile phones, the most recent Crash Bandicoot game that's been released so far. Honestly, I don't have much to say about this one. It's a basic tempo run kind of game, constantly running and collecting ingredients to make potions and weapons to fight off enemies. From the standard enemies like androids and lab assistants, to the more interesting choices like the return of the elementals, and even giving life to a scrapped character from Crash Twinsanity. I was really excited to hear that they were going to be bringing back Mr. Crumb, a much more obscure character from the franchise, originating from a Crash Bandicoot Tiger Electronic game, sometimes just called Crash Bandicoot 99X. There's a lot of costumes in this game, whether it's there in the store or from special events, and there's quite a lot of variety, specific themes to a lot of throwback to past games, like there's the Crash 4 skins, there's the Tag Team Racing and Twinsanity skins for Coco, and more recently they added in skins from Titans and Mutants, which was pretty interesting. Of course, when they gave Coco skins that show her dressed up as Megumi and Yaya Panda, I obviously had to get those, along with the retro skins. I always love seeing those. Yeah, 8-bit and 16-bit graphics are what a lot of people were into back then as their gaming nostalgia. But those low polygon graphics from the days of PlayStation and Nintendo 64, that's more of my personal gaming nostalgia. I tried collecting them all, but that proved to be a failed attempt. So instead, I just focused more on getting the outfits with the best stats for collecting certain ingredients. But yeah, Crash on the Run's a simple and fun game. And that covers all the Crash games. With how much effort that Vicarious Visions, Beanox, and all the other developers have left behind, it looks like there's a bright future for the Orange Marsupial, so here's hoping Crash will still keep rocking on in his second life. But if this is all we're gonna get, then at least it ended with a bang. That's about it for this retrospective, so I'll see you next time.